Peas on Moss is brought to you by Kimberly Schaub, a culinary scientist turned business developer. Over the past 4 years, the audience has downloaded episodes over 40,000 times, and we have 1,500 impressions across the website and a host of social media platforms. Will you consider contributing to the show to help keep it on air? Donations through Patreon help to offset the cost of web hosting, editing, and producing the various Peas on Moss offerings, from podcast episodes to videos, and every little bit helps, from corporate advertisement to sponsored content and private contributions. Reach out to me on peasonmoss.com for details. Hello, Peas on Moss listeners. Welcome to 2021. Welcome to the 5th season of Peas on Moss. It's such a pleasure and privilege to continue hosting this podcast and bringing you a close look at the people in the food industry. This year, we're doing Peas on Moss Quick Bites, 10 to 15 minute clips of longer conversations I have had with subject matter experts dropping their wisdom about the food world. My first guest to kick off 2021 is Laurie Demeritt from the Bellevue, Washington-based Hartman Group. She and the Hartman Group host periodic trends presentations for the industry, sharing information about their consumer trend data. She was the keynote speaker for a 2020 organic industry presentation, and she's a frequent speaker on their podcast, The Insatiable Appetite. Laurie and I caught up about the impact of COVID on consumer behaviors, and I asked her about what we product developers and brand managers could still do for these months later to respond to changed consumer behaviors and to continue to meet the needs of consumers as the pandemic stretches on. Let's take a listen.
For all that sort of initial joy and love we saw around people, cooking for the first time and baking bread and doing all these things, that's still sort of there. But we're also seeing from an attitudinal perspective that there's a desire going up for more exploration in food. There's also a desire to be doing less time in the kitchen right now. So I think that sort of fatigue is setting in maybe a little bit in terms of responsibilities around the food procurement and preparation as well. So we'll see some, I think, long-term change in the number of consumers who want to continue to cook. We've heard that and we've seen that. However, I think it's also, there's a little feeling of, gosh, I really wish I could go to my favorite restaurant right now and just have something really fabulous that someone else made for me.
Absolutely feel that. So what about, the research chefs, product developers, the marketing teams that are listening to our discussion right now? From the data that your team has gathered, what do you think we should be thinking about? And obviously, every business has to make their own decision. But what are some ideas as far as watching these trends and noting that there are consumer attitude changes now? There's a fatigue setting in of cooking from scratch all the time. Does this mean that we've got an opportunity here as product developers?
Absolutely. And I would really lean into that. This idea that food service traditionally has been a way to explore new food formats, new food flavors, ingredients, global food, ethnic food, vegetarian food, all these foods that maybe consumers don't yet feel like they can prepare at home. And so traditionally, food service has played a really important role there for exploring new food types of all stripes. And I think that during this time, and what we're seeing in the data is feeling like that's a real lack in consumers' lives right now, that they don't have any sort of venue for those new food formats and flavors and such, even though food service obviously is starting to open up and there's other ways to procure food from food service, but it's still much, much lower than it was 6 months ago. And so I'd say to the product developers and the innovators out there, this is really a great time to be thinking about ways to innovate. And I think what we've heard, and in fact, we just did a podcast on this ourselves, is that many of the major food companies aren't doing any innovation. And that's totally understandable in the sense that they're just trying to keep up with demand and supply, and they're just overwhelmed with day-to-day operations right now. But we think it's problematic because if they're not innovating and developing some of those new ways to explore food, they're really going to miss out, right? Because this is a consumer desire that's burgeoning. It doesn't look like food service is going to be able to come back in its same format for some period of time, and consumers are getting really bored. And so I think filling that gap, right, by introducing interesting new food formats and flavors and ingredient types, this is totally the appropriate time to do that because there's an opportunity that isn't being filled. And so I think understanding that there's this desire on the part of consumers, and I'd say it's not just about the innovation in terms of formats and flavors, but we're hearing over and over now, and it's a word that consumers use in various ways, but this idea of looking to food to help with health and resiliency. And that idea of resiliency, I think, is a really important one because it goes beyond just health. It's this idea of being very proactive, keeping myself safe, keeping my family safe. And so we recently did a study on functionality in food and beverage and dietary supplements. And it's no surprise that functionality is a really important topic for consumers right now because it's a way for them to express that resiliency so that they can, stay as healthy as they can for as long as they can. So again, from an innovation standpoint, this could also be about delivering functionality to them in new and exciting ways. And that could be, leveraging botanicals or other herbals, or other ingredients that have the sense that they are healthful, especially in terms of proactive health. So I think that innovation can be across a wide variety of different platforms, but now would certainly be a good time, acknowledging that there's a lot going on for food manufacturers and operators, but really capturing that opportunity right now as consumers start to feel like they have no way to express these kind of new food values, desires, and exploratory traits. And so stepping into that void, we think would be important to do.
Very interesting. I really wonder though, from a project management perspective, obviously we're taught that we ideally would have 12 to 18 months for a product development cycle. But 12 to 18 months, frankly, 12 to 18 days or weeks from now, are going to look so different. And we have to figure out how to shorten those development timelines, whether that's a sprint or whether that's picking up an innovation that had gotten 80% of the way there, but then had been shelved. We have to find a way to get back into the market with innovative product more quickly than, say, conventional knowledge would tell us. I'm wondering, what does that look like without it looking like a rush job? And for some of these big brands that you just mentioned, they can't afford to necessarily do a rush job.
Well, I think your point is a really important one. I think that these long timelines of the past really need to be truncated, especially given just the pace at which things had been moving and will continue to move. I don't have any magic bullets for how to make that happen. I think it's a really difficult process, but I think it's an important one to figure out how to do a better job of in terms of time efficiency, given that, right now, there is this opportunity that may not exist in 12 months in terms of meeting consumer needs. So I certainly echo your sentiment that the timelines need to get shorter in terms of bringing products to market. And whether that is done via, acquisition or product reformulation or different marketing techniques, I think there needs to be thought put in there. It doesn't necessarily mean having to design something from the ground up, per se. There are a lot of signals and cues out there that are already strong and existing products that maybe just need to be reimagined in terms of their formats or in terms of their base ingredients. But certainly finding more expedient ways to get to market would be important in terms of what we believe the opportunity is right now.
Thank you so much for this really interesting conversation about COVID and innovation that should, I think, respond to that. Where can we get more information about the research that Hartman Group has done on the impact that COVID-19 has had on the food industry and trends?
Yes, we have actually. It is a free report that you can download that comes from something called our Eating Occasions Database, Compass. And we go very in depth on eating occasions. And we've been managing that for the last 8 years. And so what we did in April of this year is we fielded it and we compared this April to last April. And so we could really get a good sense of what the differing trends are. So if you go to our website, which is hartman-group.com, you can see that report highlighted and you can just put in your name and email address and download it for free. And there's a ton of great information therein about the impact of COVID on eating behaviors and habits.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Thank you for joining the Peas on Moss podcast for this quick bite. We're offering shorter podcast episodes to help you get the quick, pertinent information and to carry on with your high-performance work and working from home. Special thanks to our Patreon sponsors who are helping me offset the podcast costs this year. If you've got some spare cash, I sure would love the support. Go to the website peasonmoss.com for details. I'm also hosting monthly happy hour events for younger professionals in food product development, the Hustlers Under 40. Visit the website to join the mailing list for the next event. You can check out past recordings on YouTube Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon.